Hi, and welcome to Simply Christ, where we make Jesus Christ our master and we explore the spiritual realm and spiritual living. I want to welcome our new subscribers. We have several new subscribers. Glad that you're here. If you have not subscribed, please do so. Also, share this video as well as our other videos with your friends and leave a comment, hit the like button. We'd greatly appreciate it. Also, check out our audiobooks, and you'll see that our latest one is from the Sadhu Sundar Singh. We'll be discussing him later on some other episodes, but go listen to some of his books. The latest one is With and Without Christ. I'm sure you'll find it really good for your spiritual development. Let's talk today about the spiritual life. Now, we've talked about the concept of spiritual living in the past in some of our other videos, and we'll leave some of the link in the descriptions that'll take you to that. But what I want today to do is talk about what spiritual life is. In the past, we discussed about Jesus' encounter with Nicodemus and how Nicodemus was asking Jesus about his teaching, and Jesus was saying that you have to be born of the Spirit. Nicodemus, a religious leader who was very well known, very well familiar with the Old Testament scriptures, says, how can we be born again? Jesus says, flesh gives birth to flesh, spirit gives birth to spirit. You must be born of the Spirit, must be born again. And so Nicodemus is trying to figure this out in his head. And we talked about that, we all know we have a spiritual life we have to live. But we really haven't defined what that spiritual life is, and that's what we're going to do in this video. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about what many people consider when they start thinking about spirituality. When you start mentioning spirituality to people, the first thing they do is throw up a red flag and say, wait a minute, especially Christians. They'll say, wait a minute, we don't want to get involved with spirituality. Why? Because the red flag is that whenever you mention spirituality, guess what people think? Meditation, New Age, crystals, Reiki healing, astral projection, all kinds of anything. The new one now, and maybe it's not so much new, but one that seems to be taking more of a popular tone now is the universe. How many times have you heard somebody say, well, the universe showed me, or the universe is trying to tell me something? And that's all part of a lot of New Age. I'm not here to poke fun at those things, okay? What I am here to do is to say that that is not what Christian spiritual living is. Do not be afraid of spirituality or the spiritual life. That is not what it is. So what is the spiritual life? What is it? Well, whenever you talk about spiritual living or spirituality to many Christians, it usually falls into two camps, at least a belief system. And I'm speaking very generally here, okay? The two camps, the first one being facts. What makes a person spiritual? Well, facts do. Meaning that I am going to study my Bible. I'm going to learn these verses. I'm going to memorize things. I'm going to be able to debate with somebody and be able to stand my ground on the theological beliefs of my church. It's arguing for the Apostles' Creed. It's standing up for the Council of Trent. It's standing up for Martin Luther nailing his theses or his theses on the door of the church. It's this church standing up for this belief. And when we have that belief and they stand strong and they've been in the church for 50 years and they've been very well known in their Bible studies, they must be deep spiritual people, right? In fact, we hear the term what? Layperson. Meaning that, well, you're not quite a professional Christian. You're still immature in your spiritual walk. Versus a person who has their doctorate degree in theology, they therefore must be a deeply spiritual person. Why? We have a doctorate in spirituality. Really, essentially, is what they're saying. But is that what real spiritual Christian living is? No, not necessarily. The next one, that camp that you want to fall in, is one that is dealing with the world of emotions. And emotional ones are dealing with feelings. It's about the feeling of something. Now, I'm not trying to knock these, okay? I want you to understand I'm not against facts and not against emotions. I'm against using those as the litmus test for the spiritual life. Meaning that, how do we know if a person's spiritual? Well, if they had an emotional reaction or if they understand things in a factual way, therefore they must be spiritual people. that is not what it is. Those things are important, but that's not what defines it. Now, on the emotional camp, let's look at the emotional camp for a moment. It's all about the emotional response or the feeling I get from an experience that I have. And from this experience that I have, it made me feel good. It made me feel really good. So therefore, it must be from the Holy Spirit. And we see this in many churches today, to where it's all about what is taking place in the worship service. And it's such an excitement feeling. And how many times have you heard someone say, the Spirit was really moving in that church? Okay, well, how do we know that the Spirit was moving in that church? Oh, the worship service was on point. There were people that were getting into it. There was a lot of swaying. People were crying. People were just expressing themselves. The Spirit was moving there. Now, maybe the Spirit was moving there, but that doesn't mean that the Spirit was moving because there was an emotional outbreak or an emotional appeal. A pastor friend of mine who's a music pastor one time told me, for a very large church, he was very tired, and I asked him, what you so tired about? And he said, well, I'm just tired because every Sunday I have to do something to outdo the Sunday before. Now, I knew what he meant, but I was asking, well, explain. Just, give me some details as to what you're talking about. He says, every Sunday I have to take people to a new emotional level, and I have to come up with something new. If not, they feel they're not receiving the Spirit of God. That's an emotional appeal, okay? Or an experience that they have. You got to have an experience. From this experience, it makes me feel a certain way. So therefore, if I have experience and it's great, and I have great feeling from it, therefore, it must be from God. Now, I'm not knocking facts or emotions. Facts and emotions are part of what God has given us in our walk with Him. We should have emotions. We should deal with facts. But that is not what spiritual living is. Spiritual living is different. I can have all the emotions in the world and not be a spiritual person. I can have all the facts in the world and not be a spiritual person. But if I'm living the spiritual life, I will have emotions, I will have facts, and use them in the right and proper way and understand them. Right? So let's talk about a couple of verses here. The first one we're going to be doing is going to be looking at Matthew chapter 3, verse 9. So before we get there, just a couple of things to talk about in what the spiritual life is. The spiritual life really is this. It's looking at life in a new reality. Not new reality. We're looking at life, we're looking at reality and seeing what reality is. What we have around us, we judge things by how things are. We look at them and say, well, this is reality. And we base what we think is real by the things we can touch, see, using our senses, or we can think about. Those are the things we say that is reality. Now, those are real because, face it, if you walk in front of a bus, you're going to get hit if you don't watch out, because the bus is going to hit you, right? That is a reality in its sense. But all those realities that we have here on this earth are all temporal. So spiritual reality is seeing reality through Jesus' eyes. It's understanding reality in the way that Jesus would see reality. That's why this channel always starts off with making Jesus our master. Because we want to be like our master. If we want to be like our master, we're going to talk about master discipleship later on. But if we want to be like our master, we have to see things like Jesus does. We're called to be like Jesus. We ever consider that? Many people don't even see that we're called to be like our master. Well, our master looks at life and reality in a totally different way. It's a way that he could go to an execution knowing he's going to raise from the dead again, and that his message was an eternal message. That's why he says, my words are spirit. He talks spiritually. Everything he talked about, he looked at life in the way that his Father looked at things. We're called to be the same way. Because, we can chase and build things. The book of Ecclesiastes is all about building things only to watch them either disappear or given to somebody else. Thousands and thousands of years ago, those civilizations are gone. All the things that they worked for are all gone, were given to somebody else, and in most cases, they're wiped out hundreds of feet below the ground. So what is reality? It's in the spiritual realm. It's in the heavenly realms. Now, it's also about developing fruit. So this reality we see, we have to also develop spiritual fruit. And that's where we're going to look at here in Matthew chapter 3, verse 9. I'm reading from the Aramaic scriptures. I'm going to leave a link here at the bottom so you can check it out and you can see. Matthew chapter 3, verse 9, before we get to it, just understand this setup. John the Baptist is in the wilderness. The Sadducees, the Pharisees are coming to him. And if there was a man that never minced words, it would be John the Baptist. He took his calling seriously. He was not a fluffy, feel-good kind of guy. He was straight to the point and made sure that people knew this was serious business. So Matthew chapter 3, verse 9, he's talking to the Pharisees and Sadducees. He says, "And you shouldn't think and say within your soul, yourself, that Abraham is a father for us, because I say unto you that God is able from these rocks, stones, to raise sons for Abraham. But behold, the axe is placed on the root of the trees. All the trees, therefore, that doesn't bear good fruit," I underlined that section here, "bear good fruit, will be cut down and thrown into the fire." Let me read that again. "All the trees, therefore, that doesn't bear good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire." So that's a very strict calling from John the Baptist, a person that was introducing Jesus, that we have got to develop spiritual fruit. And the person, the being that is not producing spiritual fruit, John says here in this verse, what? He says that the ones that doesn't bear good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire. The spiritual life is not about emotional appeals and knowing facts or memorizing scriptures or how exciting a worship service is. That's not what the spiritual life is it? Because I can do all those things but not produce one single bit of fruit. I can be the most meanest, vilest person, but I can lead you in a worship service. I can go to a church and be the meanest, vilest person, get an emotional high out of it, and leave that church building unchanged, not producing any fruit. Now the question is, what is fruit? If we're supposed to bear fruit, well, what is fruit? Let's turn now to another place. And this one's going to be in Galatians chapter 5, verse 22. It says, Paul's writing here, he says, "But the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, a long-suffering spirit, endurance, perseverance, kindness, goodness, faith. But those who are of the Anointed One, they have crucified their flesh with all its passions and lusts." So what is spiritual fruit? Well, spiritual fruit, if we want to determine whether a person is producing fruit, it's this. It's these qualities: love, it's joy, it's peace, it's a long-suffering spirit, meaning they endure much, they persevere, they're kind, they're good, they're faithful. Of course, these come in different degrees. It doesn't mean that a person has to be 100%. Just as some trees will produce some fruit and other trees will produce a lot of fruit, they're still producing fruit. Jesus works with us. He understands. Remember, we tied this into Genesis chapter 1. Remember that. In Genesis chapter 1, what happened? The Spirit came down. God said, "Let there be light." And then we see the very first things that happen. Light comes in. And then we see the separation of the atmospheres. I'm not going to go through it all, but we see different levels. God wants us to grow, but He's patient with us in our growth. But we've got to produce fruit. The entire life of the spiritual life is about producing spiritual fruit. We need to be people who are working to become loving people. Yes, working. I know that's a dirty word in many Christian circles. Oh, works. We're not supposed to work. That's nonsense. because we're supposed to strive and do things. We're supposed to strive for the Spirit. We're supposed to be self-controlled, disciplined. We're supposed to have these kind of qualities. We're called to do those things. Now, we have those fruit. And where does that come from? Well, here's where it comes from and how we get that, because the next verse he says in verse 24 is this: "But those who are of the Anointed One, they have crucified their flesh with all its passions and lusts." Now that word "but" in verse 24 is a continuation, because what Paul is talking about in the verses there in chapter 5, he's talking about walk by the Spirit and you will not satisfy the desires of the sinful nature. And he talks about how all these things are from a flesh and the lust that we have. And so he continues on talking here in verse 24, "But those who are of the Anointed One, they have crucified their flesh with all its passions and lusts." So let me ask you, how much are we working to crucify our flesh and the lust with all its passions, all its lusts? Are we working to crucify those? Are we putting them to death? That's a hard thing. It's a difficult thing to do. But God knows it's difficult. We can't do it on our own. Why? Because it's a fruit of the Spirit. When we walk in the Spirit, we decide that we're going to live this life, we're reborn, but in order to be reborn, we have to do what? We have to surrender. We have to crucify that flesh. See, that's one of the reasons why Jesus, when he went to the cross, was crucified, to give us that example, one of the many reasons, okay? But one of the reasons to show the seriousness of putting to death the idea and the concept of that sinful life of flesh. We crucified it. We have put it to death. Was the crucifixion difficult? Absolutely. The most difficult thing that Jesus could do was to go to the cross, especially because he had the free will to say no. I don't have to. I can call 1,000 legions of angels, and before you know it, it's finished. We don't have to do it. I don't have to do it. So he had that will to change his mind. But in a sense, we also have the free will to decide whether or not we're going to crucify our flesh. It's difficult. Crucifying the flesh means we have to get rid of a lot of things. We have to give up a lot of things. That's why Jesus says, count the costs. You need to count the cost. If a person is not willing to give up their mother, their father, their relationships with everybody, the whole world, and follow me, they can't be my disciple. That's the crucifixion of the flesh. That's a difficult thing to do. It's difficult to be told and to talk about it, but it's a difficult concept to do. But you know what? We have the free will to say, I don't want to do it. And then at the easy route, well, I'll just go to church and do the church thing. See, there's many parallels to the crucifixion and how we also have that free will. Another video, another topic, but you know, when these things come, I just can't help but tell you this because it's just amazing how God will show these things. Hey, that really fits in. I just have to share them with you, and I hope these are things that you'll continue to look at, investigate yourself, and pray to God and let Him reveal to you as well. So, what is this all about when we are crucifying the flesh and do all this? What are we really after? The next thing we're really truly after is not just developing this way of viewing reality in a different way and producing these fruit. Here's something that is just absolutely mind-blowing, and that is experiencing God. Now, we're going to look at a verse here, but before we get to that verse, before we look at it, I want you to look at a couple of things here first. Experiencing God is, again, not the emotion that we get out of it. Well, I had an experience with God. There's so many people who talk about their experiences with a demonic force. Okay, and I agree. Those forces are out there, the principalities and dark forces and so forth. But it seems that to them, it's the demon of a flat tire, the demon of a broken windshield washer or wiper. It's the demon of the broken door hinge. Anything that goes wrong where there's a demon behind it, and they're experiencing demonology, there's a demonic attack on them. Well, that's not the experience we're talking about, okay? We're talking about the experience where we're having with God a close fellowship. And I say a fellowship, not a relationship. We do have that relationship. Oh yes, we do. father-son, father-daughter. Totally get that. But it's more than that. It's fellowship. A good friend of mine said this to me one time. He was talking to somebody who said, I don't know about my relationship with God. I'm struggling with my relationship with God. And this friend of mine, Mike, his name is, told this person, says, I don't know what you're worried about. It's not the relationship you have to worry about. Your relationship with Father and Son is there. It's the fellowship that you're having problem with. And see, what he was saying is that I can have a relationship with my son. I have a son and a daughter. Now, I have a relationship with them. If I never hear from them to the end of my life, they're still my son and I'm still their father. So I still have a relationship with them. But do I have fellowship with them? That's the key. Fellowship with God is the key to drawing closer and experiencing God. It's fellowship. It's not just the little things that happen along our way or some feel good that we have. It's the relationship, the fellowship that we have with Him. And when that fellowship, and when we hear His voice and it's speaking to us, then we get joy out of that. That now is a true emotional response to that relationship or that spiritual life. When we're praying and then suddenly we know that the Spirit is talking to us. We're hearing His voice. And when we hear His voice, many people will say, well, it's a big thunderous voice in the sky. That is not the kind of voice that God speaks to people. God speaks to people and He's willing to talk to them. We're going to have a video on how to hear from God. What do we do to hear from God? And it's a very simple process. I hate to use the word process, steps. It's not processes or steps. It's surrendering, but we'll talk about that later. But the spiritual life is about experiencing God. It's experiencing God, hearing His voice, but it's also understanding and being part of a mystery. And this is the thing that many Christians miss. Because many Christians think, and many people who become Christians and leave Christianity because they don't find anything there for them, at least they haven't really searched for it, or they haven't found exactly what they're looking for, as the U2 song goes, right? Haven't found what I'm looking for, is the fact that what they're told as being the spiritual life is really just an emotional high on a Sunday morning and Sunday night. And they say, well, that doesn't do me any good. I want something more. So they turn to these other New Age religions and so forth. But there is a mystery, and I want us to turn now to Ephesians 3, verses 8 through 10. This is amazing. This is the verse that I think is going to open your eyes, maybe if you haven't read this, open your eyes to something brand new. Ephesians chapter 3, 8 through 10. Unto me, whom is the least, this is Paul talking, unto me, who am the least of all the holy ones, this grace is given so that I might declare unto the Gentiles the riches of the Anointed One, which wasn't looked for, and to illuminate for every man what is that administration of the mystery, that which was hidden in God from eternity, He who created all things, and that by means of the assembly, now watch this, the wisdom of God might be made known, fully distinct unto the principalities and unto the authorities who are in heaven. Now, let that sink in for a moment. That last verse, look at that last verse again here, verse 10. And when it says here the assembly, he's talking about the church. It's also translated into the church. Again, this is the Aramaic, the language many people at that time spoke. That by means of the assembly or the church, and the church is what? The elected group of people. It's not a bureaucracy. It's not a corporation. It's not a group of people with bylaws and this 503 or 501(c), whatever it is, nonprofit. It's just two or more people gathered in the name of Jesus is the church, okay? Talk about church at a later time, but watch what happens through the church, through the body of Christ who is here on earth. Get this, watch this, that through this church, the wisdom of God might be made known. Okay, that sounds cool. That's what we want, to show the wisdom of God, right? We want to make that known. But where is it going to be made? That is what's incredible and part of this mystery that is just mind-blowing to me. Fully distinct unto the principalities and unto the authorities who are in heaven. So this spiritual life that you and I have, this mission that you and I have, this grace, and if you've seen our past videos talking about grace, what is grace? Grace is not mercy. Grace is the power that God gives us through the Holy Spirit to do the things He's assigned for us to do. And what are we to do? We, as a collection of people, are supposed to do what He says here in this verse 10, that the wisdom of God may be known. We want to show the wisdom of God. God's wisdom. Our responsibility is to show God's wisdom where? Fully distinct, or how? Fully distinct to who? To our next door neighbor? Yeah, to our next door neighbor too, of course. But look what Paul describes it as. Unto the principalities and unto the authorities who are in heaven. Now, why would we need to show God's wisdom to the principalities and authorities who are in heaven? That's going to be a discussion for another time, but I'll give you a little bit. I'll leave this with you here. Go read Psalms chapter 82 and listen to some of Dr. Michael Heiser's work about the assemblies and the things that take place in heaven. And this verse will be made much clearer. What God is telling us is basically this. If we are going to live the spiritual life, we have to, number one, start looking at life through the eyes of Christ, understanding reality. And where is reality? In the heavenly realms and in the spiritual realm. Number two, we've got to produce fruit. And number three, we need to experience God and be part of His work, which is what? To show His wisdom fully distinct where? Not only to our neighbors, but where? To the principalities and unto the authorities that are in heaven. You want a mystery to live in? This is it. You live in the spiritual realm. We walk in the spiritual realm. We accept the things in the spiritual realm. We start living fully life in the spiritual realm and start getting away from this nonsense of just thinking that we're approved by God by how much we know or how much we cry. If we really want to live in the spiritual life and be part of a mystery, this is it. What we're doing is having impact through the heavens, and we're revealing these things to the principalities and the authorities who are in heaven. Incredible stuff. We'll talk more about that in the next video, okay? But or in one of the videos anyways, but I wanted to share that verse with you. Take that section of that verse, and I want you to meditate on that. Meaning meditate, I want you to think about it. You know, I have to go sit in a position or wear a robe and shave your head and go sit on a mountaintop. Just sit there and think about it and ask God, God, what does this mean? And just be quiet and listen to what He says. It's amazing. This Christianity in the spiritual life is so fun. It really is. There's so much involved in it. And when we start digging deep, I'll tell you, the deeper that you get into it, the more you're going to find out that it's going to hurt, because you're going to have to be forced to give up some beliefs and some things that we may have had in the past. Make sure to subscribe. Please leave a comment, like this video, share it with your friends. And again, check out some of the other videos on our channels. Until next time, God bless and keep experiencing God.